Oftentimes, people have ideas on things they can do to have an impact. But then they don't get involved because they say, I don't have the money. So I have this great idea, but I'm not going to do anything because I don't have the money. And I think that's a mistake. You know, I am not sure that there are any cases where you always have the money before you have the idea. If you look at the VC world, which is I operate in the venture capital world, an entrepreneur is a person who has an idea but don't have the money, and then they go looking for the people with the money to back them. And I think you could do the same. If you have an idea that you're passionate about and you're serious about it, get started. But if you're going around just telling people that I have this idea and I'm looking for money, you know, lots of people have ideas and are looking for money. I would say get started. If you have $10 you can give into doing this, get $10. If you want to start a homework program to help kids study, then start it. And then show people that you're serious, show that you could make a difference, and then you can get the money. The only situation I know in which people tend to have money before they have an idea is if you're born wealthy. If you're born into a wealthy family, you might have access to money before you have ideas, but in most of the cases, you have to have the idea first. And if you're waiting for the money in order to have the idea, like nobody's just going to give you money and say, go figure out something to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they're allergic to their money and looking for a way to get rid of it.
And then give us a call. Then all of us say, give us a call. We like those allergies.
Welcome to Black Philanthropy, our stories, where each episode spotlights awesome Black and African American leaders committed to transforming lives and communities through philanthropy. These authentic conversations will inspire, challenge, and remind you you are not alone. Here's your host, award-winning writer, director, and founder of Samuel and Murray, Michelle Renee Jackson.
I am so grateful for you today. I am so grateful to be the host of our awesome podcast, Black Philanthropy, Our Stories. But I am even more pleased to introduce our next guest, Nic Brathwaite, who is an amazing venture capitalist, amazing colleague, amazing philanthropist, amazing intellectual thinker. We first have to start with that beautiful voice that you have. Where are you from, Nic?
I was born in Grenada in the Caribbean. I think my accent is mostly Grenadian, but it's also a mixture of some of the other places I've lived. When I was growing up, I lived in Guyana, Barbados, Canada, the US, of course. So I think there's a little bit of influence from lots of things, but it's mostly Grenadian.
Say a little bit more about what you do and how you like to be in the world.
I'm a venture capital investor in the technology space. I co-founded a venture capital firm called Celesta Capital. We founded that firm back in 2013. Before that, I co-founded a private equity firm called Riverwood Capital. So I've been an investor now for many years, but I'm best known for being a technologist and technology executive. I started my career as an engineer at Intel. Most of the time I was at Intel, I was in technology development, developing processes for making chips. And then I left and became an entrepreneur, and then later on became an executive. And I'm best known in the industry as the Chief Technology Officer of Flextronics, where I spent 10 years in that role. And many people believe I think I was the first Black Chief Technology Officer of a publicly traded business.
The question that is so often associated with the word philanthropy when people are Googling it is ultimately, what is philanthropy? And to me, it is surprising that perhaps for you, for me, what can feel pretty obvious of what philanthropy is can be really actually mysterious for so many people across the world. And so I wonder for you, when you think of what philanthropy is, what comes to mind? How do you define philanthropy?
I truly believe that God blesses us so that through us, he can bless other people. And I believe that my blessings were not intended only for me, but they were intended to be shared. And, you know, when I think about success, for example, I think we measure success wrong these days. We often measure success based on things like titles or where people live or what their bank account looks like and things like that. But I actually believe that success should be measured based on the impact one has on the lives of others. And I take that seriously. And so for me, philanthropy is simply executing on those things, impacting the lives of other people and sharing God's blessings with others as well. And it is a reflection of how much a person cares.
When you think about the reflection of how much somebody cares, what does that look like for you?
Caring means that you see life as more than just, what you accumulate and what you do, but you see yourself as being a part of a bigger of something bigger than just you being here and accumulating and doing things for yourself, but you have a role to play in society in general. And part of that role is to help improve the lives of others.
Based on your idea of what philanthropy is there an additional definition that you might have for Black philanthropy, or is it the same thing?
I don't separate philanthropy by race or color or anything like that. I think philanthropy is philanthropy. I think caring is caring. And I think giving is giving. However, I do believe that we have an opportunity and an obligation to make sure that we look at within our own communities and help those in the communities that we represent, the constituencies that we represent.
When did you first encounter the idea of philanthropy, Nic?
Even long before I had resources, I was always interested in helping people. I remember even when I was at university and I would go home on vacation, I was always, taking things back and always trying to figure out how I can help people. This is not something that I encountered one day or anything like that. The idea of giving, like I said, is a function of how much you care. And if you don't give when you don't have a lot, it's not likely that you'll give when you have a lot. So I've said many times that if you're not charitable with $10, you probably are not going to be charitable with $10 million. And so for me, it's not about encountering. It's more about continuing your personality, what you believe, and the commitment you have to helping others and impacting the lives of others. But in terms of how I got more involved in putting something more organized together, it came about from something I learned about my dad. I was an adult when I found out that when my dad was in high school, my dad was the son of a runaway who ran away from his family when he was about 12 years old. And he passed away when my dad was only 16 years old. And my dad's mother was not able to continue to pay the boarding that was required for him to go to school in a different island. The island he was from did not have a high school back in those days, and so he had to go to school in Grenada. He was from an island called Carriacou. And when his father passed away, he had to leave school in his senior year because his mother could not afford to pay the boarding for him to continue to go to school in Grenada. And from the reports I heard, he was a brilliant student. I got that story, by the way, not from my dad, but my dad asked me to pick up something from his doctor one time, and I went to his doctor to get it. And while I was there, the doctor came out and was talking to me, and he told me he had gone to school with my dad. He first gave me the story, and then my mom, told me it was true. So I asked my dad, and of course my dad downplayed it. He didn't even want to talk about it. But that's where I learned about this. And I made a commitment to myself since then, not to anybody else, but I just thought to myself that if I ever ended up with the resources where I can make a difference, I want to do something to honor my parents by helping people who would have been in a situation similar to my dad's. So the idea was people who had the scholastic ability, but didn't have the financial means of continuing education, that I would step in and try to help. And that's how this got started. And then I I created a family foundation at the advice of friends, and that was the beginning of what is called philanthropy for me.
Because you have been so successful, because you have broken barriers both as a VC, what it means for so many Black communities that you exist with the level of economic success that you have is important to a lot of us. I think at the same time, we often do see that when members of the community like yourself, Black people like yourself, really do succeed, there is this expectation that then you owe the community through your philanthropy, that you are obliged to then give back. And so I wonder, in your own experience, your sense of obligation to having to give back.
I honestly believe that generosity is a function of how much you care. It's not a function of how much you have. And, there's a big difference between you being generous and you responding to everybody coming after you and asking you. I don't necessarily give to everybody who asks me. That's not necessarily philanthropy, in my opinion. I mean, if I walked on the street and somebody asked me for $1 and I gave them $1, I'm not so sure if I would call that philanthropy. So I think if you care about helping people, if you care about making a difference in the lives of others, if you care about this world in which we live and ensuring that we can protect it and save it for future generations, then you give because you care. And I think that's what drives philanthropy, in my opinion. It's people who care about something or many things and want to do something to help either enable or help protect or whatever the case may be. And to me, that is very different from somebody saying, I went and I asked somebody for money and they didn't give me any money, or somebody trying to indicate that a person should be obligated to giving them money because they have money. But whether or not he chooses to give is a function of he or she, by the way, chooses to give is a function of how much they care. They care about the people, they care about the neighborhood. But if you try to give to everybody who asks or everybody who believes that you're obligated to give to them or they deserve to get some of what you have, you probably wouldn't have too much for too long. There's a difference between giving to a cause, giving to something you believe in versus just handing out money to people, not even knowing what they're going to do with the money. People come and say, you know what, I need to buy a car. Could you give me $1,000 as a down payment? Or, I can't pay my rent. Or that's not philanthropy, because it doesn't necessarily mean you're improving anything. For example, people come to me all the time and ask me for loans, and I don't give loans.
Why not? Why not?
Well, there are multiple reasons. One is, a lot of times people want a loan because they couldn't pay their rent. But it's not a loan because they can't pay you back. If they can't pay the rent, they're not going to be able to pay you back. So it's not a loan. They're structuring it to look like a loan, but it's not a loan. It's actually a donation. And in that case, I'd rather just give you a donation. But the bigger problem is, when I give you this, does it fundamentally change anything? Or next month, you're just going to be asking somebody else. And the next month, you're just asking somebody else. Philanthropy needs to have an impact. Philanthropy needs to help change something. It needs to help move something forward. To me, that's philanthropy. It's not just about helping. Philanthropy is not just about helping somebody pay their rent this month or buy baby formula next week. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things. But to me, when I think of philanthropy, I think about philanthropy having an impact on something, on somebody's life or on something. You should be working to change something. You should be working to improve something. When we give somebody a scholarship, that scholarship is intended to change their lives. It changes the trajectory of their lives. Hopefully it changes the trajectory of their entire family. But it doesn't mean we don't give to people. I mean, I give money to people all the time. But I don't consider that philanthropy, to be quite honest with you. I just consider that helping somebody out. Somebody needs to buy food, and you're walking by, and I give people on the side of the street money, but I don't consider that philanthropy.
So philanthropy for you, the major distinction is the impact, the transformation.
You happen to change something. To me, that's what I think about. I don't know what the official definition is. Like I said, I've never looked it up, but that's how I think about it.
The often quoted definition is love for humanity, right? And so how one is loving, in this case, the conversation is loving humanity predominantly through one's finances, through financial transformation. There's other ways to love people. My father, I often talk about my dad on the podcast, who this podcast is dedicated to, that was never really identified as a philanthropist, even by me, because I came out of as a fundraiser, being in the sector since 2011. I always understood philanthropy as endowments, as charitable gift annuities, as DAFs. I only knew it predominantly in specific large, you got to give a large amount of money to be considered someone who is engaged in philanthropy, not acknowledging that my dad, as a Black man, was someone who would see a family walking down the street who was homeless, invite them to live in his home until they can get back on their feet. And they did. And then they moved on and their lives were transformed to that point.
To me, that's philanthropy, because you're impacting, you're helping others, you're impacting, you're improving society, you're improving the lives of others, you're helping to change a situation. But if I give you a loan and the next day you just go ask somebody, the next month you still can't pay your rent and you just go ask somebody else, and every month you're just going around asking different people, nothing is changing. There's no real impact. I don't know that there's an impact if nothing is changing. That situation is still going to be the same situation 10 years from today. So what have you accomplished? Have you really helped the person? Have you improved society? Have you really had an impact? By the way, I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things, because I do those things all the time. I can tell you that there are lots of people who have benefited from donations I give or money I give. I don't do loans. If I can help you out, I help you out. I don't need to be repaid. But I don't know that I call that philanthropy. I don't know that I call that. For me, philanthropy is really helping others in a way that will allow them to change their situation. There has to be some improvement at the end of the day. You're working towards some improvement. It doesn't mean that your donation alone will do that, but you're working to help have an impact and improve things. And that's driven by caring and love. But, that's why I say generosity is about how much you care. Philanthropy is a function of how much you care. If you don't care, you're not going to be philanthropic. It has nothing to do with how much money you have.
You and your family have a foundation. Can you tell us more about your foundation? What are the things that you and your family are excited about supporting?
Our foundation is called the PETNA Foundation, PETNA. Those are the initials of my parents. PET were my mom's initials, and NA was my dad's initials. And as I mentioned before, I started this to honor my parents. And that's why I named it after my parents. And I started it to do things that I believe my parents would do if they had access to the resources that I have. So I think about what were important to my parents. Education, for example, is very important to my parents. It was very important to my parents, going all the way back to my grandparents. My grandfather, as I mentioned before, was a runaway. Ran away from home at the age of 12. He was an abused child. This is a young man who lived in many places. It is believed he worked on the Panama Canal. Wherever he could find a job, he went and worked. And he invested in the education of his children so that they would not have so that they could have a better life than he had. And that investment that he made in his children, including my dad, is responsible for where I am today. As a result of his investment in education and making sure that my dad and his siblings had a good education, that led to my dad. My dad started off his career as an educator, later on became other things. And him investing in our education, I ended up where I am. And so that investment is proof that education, if you invest in the education of youth, you can transform the families for generations. I'm the grandson of a 12-year-old runner. My dad, who was Prime Minister of Grenada and who was knighted by the Queen of England, is the son of a 12-year-old runaway. He was only able to achieve the things he was able to achieve because of the investment that was made in his education. And so we focused our foundation around education and providing opportunities to people that would allow them not just to change the trajectory of their lives, but the lives of their families. And a big requirement for us is being convinced that the people we're investing in are people who are likely to give back. So it's not just a question, for example, of you being able to get into a great university. It's not just a question of you having a need, because there are lots of people with needs, but we want to invest in people who will also invest in others.
Nic, what does that investment look like right now? How are you supporting young people through education?
We have a scholarship program at my alma mater in Canada, where I did my undergrad degree, which is considered one of the top universities in the world. And we have a program to help young people who have the ability to get into a top university but have no means to get into any university. The people who typically get our scholarships, this is not about somebody who wants to go to a top university but can't afford it. These are people who can't afford to go to almost any university. I'll give you an example. We have a scholarship winner this year from Jamaica who almost dropped out of the program because she couldn't afford to pay the application fees to the school. I mean, that's the kind of people that we are helping. But she was able to get in. I mean, we had to tell her, hold on, we'll take care of that for you. We'll pay for the application for you. Because she would not be able to go to a university of any kind. If you can't even pay for the application to go to a university, how are you going to go to a university? And these are the types of people that we are helping. That's an example. And we've had this scholarship for almost 12 years now, and we pay everything. There is not, we pay, if we have to pay the application fees, we pay the application fees, we pay tuition, we pay housing, we pay for food, we pay for books, and we even pay for you to fly back home on vacations to visit your family. I mean, everything. Because these are people who can't really afford anything. But these are people who are brilliant. They're phenomenal. And you look at some of the people who have won our scholarships over the years and what they're doing, just phenomenal. That's one. We have another program we support that's called SPICE, which is also in the Caribbean, but it's held in Barbados, where we get young people in 16, 17 years old. This was started by a friend of mine, Professor Cardinal Ward, who is an MIT professor and has a similar program he runs in Massachusetts. And he started this in the Caribbean, and we've been supporting him from inception. And through that, the idea of that program was to help these students who we think are very talented and is focused on STEM, and help them to be able to get scholarships to go to some of the top universities in the world. And the idea here was to create a program not just to give scholarships individually, but this was kind of the rising tide raises all ships. You bring these students together and you help develop them over, some people might call it a boot camp that we have every summer. And this has been going on for about 12 years as well. Through this program, we've sent over 200 students to universities, some of the top universities in the world. We currently have 25 of these students at MIT. We have 4 or 5 at Stanford. We have at Harvard. We have at Yale. We have at McMaster. I went. Over 200 students have been able to get scholarships from these schools and other sources to go to some of the top universities in the world. There's another program that was started by some teachers who recognized that not everybody has the scholastic ability to be able to get scholarships to go to universities. So they started working with young men to help them develop their athletic abilities to get athletic scholarships. These were teachers they were not athletes themselves. And they started this program, and they had 2 objectives. One was to recruit young men away from gangs, and the other one was to help them develop their athletic ability so they can get athletic scholarships. And we heard about this program, and we decided this is a program we want to support. That program has since sent, I think 2 or 3 dozen students to universities in the United States. They've produced 5 NCAA champions, and they've produced 3 Olympic medalists.
What does it feel like for you, Nic, to know that your own sense of commitment to care, to loving, but also having the resources to do that, and also honoring your parents in all of this process? What does it mean for you to look back on the ways that, were it not for you and for your family to invest in these students along the spectrum, that you don't have the Olympic winners and you don't have the students who've been able to fly back home and apply for the programs that they couldn't otherwise afford to apply to and then excel in?
I don't look at it from the perspective of thinking about it were it not for me. I think of it more from the perspective of, am I having an impact on the lives of other people? And am I using the resources that God has placed in my hands to be able to do the kind of things to bless others just like I am being blessed? And I look at it more from that perspective, and I get a great sense of delight and joy, but also fulfillment, knowing that I've been able to play a role in helping to transform the lives of others. And I have been asked, on some programs that we support, I remember being asked by a friend of mine one time, why am I supporting that particular initiative? Because there were a lot of problems with it. And I responded and said to him, if not me, then who? And since I can't identify who the other person was going to be,
I guess it's going to be you.
Then it had to be me.
Would you feel comfortable sharing a level of investment that you have invested over time into students?
Our scholarship that we give as part of the McMaster University initiative that we have, equates, roughly speaking, to about between $200,000 and $250,000 per student. And we give that particular scholarship, we give 1 to 2 students a year. Some of the other programs don't take that much money. The program that we have in SPICE, that program is, maybe $10,000 per student. But the impact it has is it prepares these students, like I said, to get to universities. So now you have over 200 students who have gone through this program and got into universities by being able to get scholarships. So one should not assume that the only way to have an impact is to just give huge numbers of money and you're waiting for you to have that huge amount of money to be able to give. You can find programs where $1,000 can have an impact. The important thing is to make sure that you have an impact. Now, one of the things we like to do and how we think about giving is we like to work on programs where we believe that there is also intellectual capital that's being applied. As an investor, I believe that financial capital is not what makes businesses successful, not startups. Financial capital is the tool that is used to help to create success. But intellectual capital is actually the most important ingredient. So we like to back people who have the intellectual capital, or in some cases, if we could also bring intellectual capital to assist, to help ensure success, then you will find that the small amounts of money that you do invest can go a long way if it's coupled with intellectual capital.
Nic, can you give an example of when you gave both through financial resources, but also through intellectual resources as well?
I had a friend who once told me about a school in a small village in Tanzania, Africa. He was from Tanzania. It's the school he went to. His dad had started the school. His dad had passed away. and they had lots of problems in the village and in the school. My understanding was the village did not have running water, the school had no running water, and people would have to fetch water multiple times a day to bring water to the school for different means, even flushing toilets and things like that. He was looking to try to help raise money. And I said to him, instead of just giving you money, why don't you tell me what is the biggest problem that you think the school has? And he said the lack of water. And I said, what if I can help you solve that problem? And he said, that would be great. Now, I don't know anything about water and stuff like that, but my brother is a hydrogeologist. So I called my brother up and I said, I have this project I want you to help me figure out how to solve. I'll finance it. And we discussed it. And he said, yeah, I think I can help with that. And I told him, I said, my understanding is there have been 6 attempts to put wells in that village before, and they were not successful. This is what I was told. And I said, so, this might be a bigger problem than we think, but we have to make it work. And I was told that, hundreds of thousands of dollars was spent trying to put these wells in, but they were mostly done by NGOs and other types of organizations. They didn't have somebody like my brother, who is a hydrogeologist. But then I went and I recruited another person. I have another friend who was a project manager at Lockheed, and he is involved in space launches and all these things. So I went to him and I said, I want to recruit you here because we're going to go do a project in Africa that none of us have ever been to. We don't even know where this place is on the map, and we're going to go try to do this. And since you know how to send stuff to space and on the moon and stuff, you can help us figure out how to pull off a project in Africa. And he said, sure. So we got together and my brother did the work and stuff. And he came back a few weeks later and he said, I got a plan. We're going to get water. I said, I want the well in the school. It has to be on the school compound. I don't want them to have to be fetching water any place. And he said, I got it. And then I said, I forgot to tell you, this well has to be able to generate at least 30 gallons of water a minute. And he was like, I got it. He said, I got it. We're gonna find water. The water is gonna be at 100 and I forgot what he told me, 150 feet or I might have the numbers wrong, so don't quote me. And I can't remember the details.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 50 feet. I don't remember what he told me, but he told me we're gonna have water. And I said, you know what, man, I can't take any chances. I need you to go there and make sure that this thing works. And he said, okay. So he went to Tanzania. And he called me up and he said, I have everything set up. And I said, where are you? And he said, I'm on a safari. And I go, on a safari? Like, aren't you there to make sure everything is going to go well? He goes, everything is going to go well. I showed the guys what they needed to do and we got everything worked out. Within a couple of weeks after they started drilling, we had a well. We were generating more water than we had planned, and the well worked. And it cost a total of about $60,000 or $70,000 to put that well in, when there was over $1 million that had been spent before trying to put wells in this place, and they were not successful. And the reason this was successful wasn't because of the $50,000 or $60,000. It was because of my brother's ability. That's what made it successful. That's what intellectual capital looks like. It was the money was just meant to support the person with the intellectual capital.
One of the things that you said a moment ago, Nic, was that you don't have to have huge sums of money to be able to create impact. And one could start to say, well, you know what, again, I don't have $60,000 to give to this cause, but I do have some intellectual capital that I might be able to offer. What kind of criteria could some of our listeners use to be able to start to identify what kind of intellectual capital they might have in their home, in their communities, in their churches, in addition to their finances, that actually can help them start to rethink how they actually can contribute through their philanthropy, not just being financial, but intellectual support as well?
Oftentimes, people have ideas on things they can do to have an impact, but then they don't get involved because they say, I don't have the money. So I have this great idea, but I'm not going to do anything because I don't have the money. And I think that's a mistake. I am not sure that there are any cases where you always have the money before you have the idea. If you look at the VC world, which is I operate in the venture capital world, an entrepreneur is a person who has an idea but don't have the money, and then they go looking for the people with the money to back them. And I think you could do the same. If you look at the examples I gave, the one example of these female teachers who decided they want to do something about the gangs in their region, in their area, and that they were going to go start an athletic program to recruit young men so that they didn't join the gangs or take them away from the gangs and help them develop their athletic ability so that they could get them scholarships. These women were not athletes, and they were not men, and they didn't have any money. They eventually got a coach who believed in what they were doing to come on and support them, and he became a co-founder of this organization. And then they got people like me to come in and finance it. So to me, if you have the desire and you have the ability. By the way, these women, one of them, I know for sure, went and got trained to be to be an athletic trainer. She didn't have that ability before, but she was so committed to it and wanted to make sure she could add value that she went and took classes so that she could develop the intellectual capital, the ability to be able to help. The example I gave of my friend who said they needed water in this village in Tanzania, and I went to my brother. Again, if you have an idea that you're passionate about and you're serious about it, get started. But if you're going around just telling people that I have this idea and I'm looking for money, lots of people have ideas and are looking for money. I would say get started. If you have $10 you can give into doing this, get $10. If you want to start a homework program to help kids study, then start it. And then show people that you're serious, show that you can make a difference, and then you can get the money. The only situation I know in which people tend to have money before they have an idea is if you're born wealthy. Mm-hmm. If you're born into a wealthy family, you might have access to money before you have ideas. But in most of the cases, you have to have the idea first. Mm-hmm. And if you're waiting for the money in order to have the idea, like nobody's just going to give you money and say, go figure out something to do with it. Mm-hmm. Unless they're allergic to their money and looking for a way to get rid of it.
And then give us a call. Then all of us say, give us a call. We like those allergies. Talk a little bit about the transition that your family went through in your philanthropy, in your giving, when it was just maybe something that you did more informally and then actually making it quite formalized and creating a foundation.
I think I grew up being a generous person because my parents modeled generosity for us. And so giving giving and helping people was just something that we saw. And I think we all, that's just me, but my siblings also grew up doing a lot of the same things. So, and my wife is also generous and also cares a lot. So we've been giving for many, many years. We formalized the foundation, the family foundation, maybe, I don't remember exactly when, but maybe 15 years or so ago. Up until then, we'd hear about a cause, we'd just write a check and give to things. And it was not the most efficient way to do it, quite frankly. And from a tax perspective, it wasn't necessarily the best way to do it. And our accountants kept telling us, stop doing that. And lots of people were telling us we have to do this differently. But we started the foundation primarily based on the advice of others who were explaining to us why it makes sense to do this and how this works. We didn't know anything about how foundations work. We didn't know like what a family foundation would look like. We didn't know any of those things. So having people who can give advice and help you do it was important. So if you look at our board today is made up of people who we have one person who has run a pretty decent-sized foundation and has spent their whole career in this industry. We have other people on the board who have lots of knowledge and information. Those are the people that helped us to figure out how to do this and provide guidance and stuff to us. My pastor at my church, who unfortunately just passed away, he is another one that helped us to do it. In fact, initially I told him, he would say, let's do this and formalize. I said, to him, you come and show me how to do it and I'll do it. So, and I said, why don't you become the chairman and let's set this up and you tell us what to do. And that's what we did. So being open to advice from others and having people who can give you the right advice to do these things is also important. Without those people, I'm not sure we would have had a foundation. We certainly would not have had it then.
I would love to know more about your family approach to philanthropy. Is it a one person making the decision and then everybody just falls in place, or how do you and your family make a decision together about what the giving priorities are going to be for the foundation?
First of all, we have a board of directors, or a board of trustees, and the board makes the decisions in general. But of course, we could make recommendations. We could bring forward ideas to the board, and any member of the board could also have ideas. So all of the ideas don't come from us. Anybody on the board who is passionate about something that fits into what we do could bring an idea in, and if it makes sense, we all support it. So, today we have a board of, like I said, my pastor, who is the chairman, actually just passed away a week ago. So up until then, we had a board of 6 people. Before that, it was 5. We recently added one of my daughters to the board. But for many years, the board was 5. My wife and I and 3 others. So my wife and I weren't even the majority on the board. And quite frankly, I don't get involved in a lot of the decisions on which projects we should support or not until it comes to a vote. We have other people. We have a scholarship committee, for example, and they are the ones that go through and screen the applicants and then make the recommendations to the board. I'm not involved in that at all. And that's deliberate, by the way, because as you mentioned before, I get lots of calls from all kinds of people who want, can you help my daughter? My daughter needs X amount of money to pay school fees for next semester, this and that and the other. Part of this was to shield me from those that I can say, submit your application, the board will look at it and the board will decide. And, if I want to support something, personally, just based on some friend or something, I do that separately outside of the foundation. I could just write a check and say, here's some money, use this to help your daughter and stuff. But then that's kept separate. So there's an official process and a formal way of doing this. And like I said before, my wife and I don't even make up the majority of the board. Even though all the money in the foundation comes from us.
Is that hard to have your philanthropy being decided ultimately not by you?
See, I don't see it that way. We set the direction on the type of things that we want to do. And like I say, any of us could bring up ideas. So for example, the idea I gave, the support to this organization with the athletes, that was my idea. I came with that and I said, hey, here's something I want to support. I presented to the board. I mean, the truth is the board is not going to say no if it's a good, if it's a good idea and it fits within what we say we want to do. And anybody from the board, we have an initiative we support where we support refugees and helping refugees to be able to get to university. And that was brought up by a different board member. And we support that. We have an initiative right now where we just started an initiative this year to support Indigenous students at a Canadian university. And like I think that might have been my idea, but I'm not too sure. But we all have. It doesn't matter who the idea is. If we all believe that it's the kind of thing we want to do and it fits within the charter and of the foundation, anybody can bring up any ideas. So I don't look at it as, and I've never had an idea that I brought up that I wanted to do to the board that the board said no. Actually, the bigger problem is convincing my wife and my daughter. That's usually the bigger issue. But no, I like the way I like it that way. I think it was great. I think having other people with different perspectives. As a business person, I know the value of having different perspectives on a board, and I think it's fantastic.
So oftentimes, Nick, what we talk about is the sector of philanthropy. There's $500 billion that is given from by individuals, corporations, foundations to communities, particularly in the U.S. Each year. And so this, sector that is ultimately moving money around. And oftentimes, I am very curious what one's dream might be for this community that is ultimately in the business of moving money around. And I count you in that sense of business of moving money around because you have a foundation, you have institutionalized it, you have formalized it, and you're transforming people as a result. I wonder, do you have a dream for the larger sector of philanthropy of which you are now a part of as a foundation, of what you're hoping might be 10 years from now, 100 years from now?
I think there are lots of people in this world who care deeply about a lot of things, and the fact that they're willing to apply their resources to help address these issues is just phenomenal. And I think in many cases there are people who are helping out others that look nothing like them. And I mean, one of the you ask a lot about Black philanthropists and stuff. I think it's just incredible that you have lots and lots of people in this world who care deeply about issues that they themselves have never experienced, but they care about it enough that they're willing to apply their resources to help address them and to help make other people's lives better. I think that is just phenomenal. And I think there's a lot of money available for people who share similar passions but may not have the resources to tap into these others and help solve problems. I think it's just wonderful. I just think we are incredibly blessed to have people like that who are willing to go out and support things. People, for example, you have people who don't know, have never experienced some of the injustices that others have experienced, but they're sensitive to it and they're willing to put their resources to help address it. You have people who have never had a problem getting resources to go to school or to buy books and things like that. They don't have that experience, but they're willing to put their resources to help people who don't have those. And so I think we're incredible. And this country is a place where you see a lot of very generous people. Unfortunately, maybe it's not unfortunate, but a lot of the times it's the people who give big money that get the most attention, and they need to get the attention because they've given up tons and tons of money. But we also have to recognize that there are other people who don't have the same amount of money, who are actually making bigger sacrifices, because when you look at what they're giving compared to what they have, the sacrifices are actually bigger. And I think those people also need to be celebrated.
When we think about the $500 billion that is donated each year through philanthropy from individuals, corporations, foundations, that we often recognize that number of about less than 5 or 3% actually goes to communities of color or Black communities, depending on which research you're looking at. And the question that I think we're, at least for many of us, are asking is, how can we ensure that Black communities are getting what they need through philanthropy?
We don't have a right to people's money. So the fact that you have X amount of dollars being given to philanthropy and only X percentage are going to the Black community, we don't have a right to that money. The Black people don't have a right to that money. So that's not the issue. The issue really is, are the causes that we care the most about being supported or not supported? And if the causes that we care most about are not being supported, what can we do to make sure that the people who have access to these resources are aware of these causes? Because sometimes they're not. I'm aware of some of the things that I support. I'm aware of them because somebody came and told me about that problem, and I decided to go do something. We support refugees. We supported refugees because you had at one time a bunch of refugees coming in, and somebody came and said, "Here is a problem," and I felt touched enough to say I need to do something to help, even if it's small. I happen to care a lot about the indigenous communities and some of the challenges that those indigenous communities have. And I learned about this from other people. And as a result of that, I help those areas. But we as Black people don't have a right to other people's money. Like they're not obligated to give us their money. But what we need to understand is try to understand why is that happening. So the statistics is one thing, and but for me, we need to understand why. What are the issues here? Is it that they're not aware? Is it that they don't trust the organizations that are solving the problems that they care about?
One colleague would say it's an institutional issue. For me, it's ultimately a fundraising issue. That is my primary concern, right? Ultimately, as somebody who fundraises, or if I was running a nonprofit, and I see that we need to raise more money because we know that Black communities in particular are losing their funding in very specific ways in this last year and a half or so. And so for me, I look at that and think I would love to help more communities know how to have better fundraising skills.
But then we need to address that. We need to say that. We need to say, here is the problem that we need to fix instead of just using statistics, because I don't know what to do with that information without knowing the rest of the story behind that. And we have to be careful not to come across as acting as though we have a right, we have an entitlement to other people's money, because that's also a turnoff. If somebody came to me looking for money and they acted as though they're entitled to my money, they're not going to get my money. I'll just tell you that right now. I don't care who they are.
Oftentimes, yes, in fundraising spaces, there is a sense of we got to get that money. I certainly have felt that. I see the charter for the foundation. I see the guidelines for the application. Like, I got to get that money, knowing that I can't guarantee. It's never my choice. I know enough as a fundraiser to know that donors give because of their own decision making and their own priorities, not because of mine. The best fundraisers that I know always say that no, it's not about you. Whether they give, it's not about you.
Yeah.
Whether they don't give, it's not about you. That it's ultimately about how does that person want to enact change. It's not for love for everybody. For some, it's like tax liability. Like, I got to get these write-offs before the end of the year. We all, fundraisers, all know that. By December 31st, call these people because they need to get the money out the door. That's fine. But I think for others, you've also said and identified, this is my own process in decision-making on how we give. Everybody who comes in saying you owe me this because you've earned this much rarely ever gets what they're asking for.
Also, find the people who care about what you're trying to raise the money for. Oftentimes, what we do is we look for the biggest donors. We hear this person just gave $1 billion to something. So let's go to that person. But what that person gave $1 billion to is not what you're trying to raise money for. So sometimes we focus on the wrong thing. Sometimes what you have to do is try to find out who are the people who seem to be supporting the kind of things that I'm trying to raise money for, because that clearly shows that they care about those things. And then let's go talk to those people. And we need to be careful about these statistics. I'll give you one in the VC community. In the VC community, people talk all the time about the fact that 1% of VC money goes into Black founders. Well, the next question I have to ask is, what percent of the people that VCs see to fund are Black? Because if only 1% of them are Black and they get 1% of the money, it seems like it's about right. The other thing people don't look at is when they say that, do you know the same amount goes into funding, about the same amount goes into funding women founders? And here's the problem with that. Women make up 50% of the population. Black people in the US make up 10% of the population. So 10% of the population is getting the same amount of VC funding as 50% of the population, and we think we have the biggest problem. So that's why you have to be careful about statistics. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there is not a problem. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if you approach it from that perspective, you come across as entitled. and you're not really addressing what the real issue is. Because if the issue is that the VCs are not seeing enough of the Black founders, that's why the Black founders are not getting more money, then let's go fix that problem. But just going and telling the VCs you need to put more money into Black founders, but if they're not seeing them, if the Black founders are not coming to them, if they don't know where they are, how are they going to put more money into them? So let's make sure we're addressing the right problem. Let's make sure that if the problem is that we need to find the people who are passionate about supporting the issues that we have, let's spend more time finding those people, not just going out in general. So if 10% of the philanthropists are supporting the causes that we're interested in, just try to find those 10% and focus on them.
When you think back about what legacy you want to have in the space of how you cared and were generous, what you want your legacy to be in philanthropy?
I have to admit, I don't do anything from the perspective of legacy. I don't really think about it from that perspective. As I said before, I just want to be a person, to be known as a person who was willing to help. But that's not the reason I do it. I do it because I really feel good helping people. I really feel good when I can help somebody, when I can see somebody in need and I know I could do something that helps them to be able to get out of that situation in a sustainable way. I just feel great about it. It's not, I don't focus on me and what my legacy would be and how people will think about me in the future. In fact, a lot of the stuff I do, people don't even know about it. I don't go around there talking about what I do. You asked me to come and talk about this and I did, but generally speaking, I don't even like to talk about these things. I get my satisfaction from watching the impact that I have on the lives of other people. And I try to set up the things I do to be sustainable. So I hope that, my kids will continue to do the kind of things that we started here. And I have one of my daughters is already on the board of our foundation and learning and seeing this. And I'm hoping that by me modeling for them what generosity looks like, just like my parents modeled it for me, that they will continue. But at the end of the day, I won't have much control over that when I'm gone. So, I just want to do as much as I can to help as many people as I can, and the legacy will take care of itself.
If you're feeling hopeful these days, where does your hope come from?
If you're a Christian like I am, you believe that there's a God and God is in control, and I hope that things will improve over time.
If people want to stay connected to you, because we believe in community here, what's a way to stay connected to you?
Well, the only social media platform I'm on really is LinkedIn.
Is there anything that we can do as a listener community to support you?
Prayers are always welcome. But I think the most important thing is I hope that I can serve as an example of how we can help each other. If you could take anything from me, when I was a student, I was trying to help people. I had no money, but I was helping young people, and I think start with whatever you have. But it doesn't have to be money. The scholarships we give, one of the key requirements to get our scholarship is you have to prove that you're a person who could be trusted to help others. And we don't depend on an essay. We look at what you've done and what you're doing. And most of the people that get our scholarship, they've been in the community helping each other, helping people. And that's why we decide to help them, because we believe that they've already demonstrated that they can be trusted to help others in the future when they have resources, because when they don't have any resources, they're already helping.